Hello everyone. This video is an introductory lesson that covers a very critical question variety that appears in the GRE. Over the course of the next few slides, I will be discussing GRE reading comprehension with you in considerable detail. To start off, let me revise with you that the reading comprehension is a question type that comes under the section verbal reasoning, which is one of the three sections that you find on the GRE. Now, to introduce you to the concept, I would like to tell you first of all what reading comprehension is all about and what it is not about. Well, you must know this, that reading comprehension is a test of comprehension, right? And because it is so important, about 1/3 of all verbal questions are reading comprehension questions. Now, this means that when you attempt these questions, you will see up to 8 passages that you have to answer questions related to. Alright? Now, obviously, all the passages will not be the same. Some passages will be short and some will be long. For the shorter passages, you will have 1 to 2 questions associated with it. And for the longer passages, you will have 3 to 4 questions associated with it. Now, don't worry. Just because there are multiple questions associated with the passage does not mean that you have to answer multiple questions at the same time. You will only see one question at a time and you will only answer one question at a time. How this happens is something you will understand in the next slide when I describe to you the RC format. That is the question format in which the question is presented to you. Right. Now, before that, let me also tell you some more about the RC. That is, the kind of topics that appear in the passages are, very simply put, physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, arts and humanities. Now, you must be wondering why there's such a broad range of topics. Well, easily so, because the GRE likes to test you to see how well you can comprehend all kinds of material. So if you're a good science student, you will be tested hard on how you comprehend social sciences and arts and humanities. If you're a humanities student, then you will be tested on how well you understand physical sciences, right? That is why there's a vast variety of topics. Now, because it is testing your comprehension, no pre-existing subject knowledge is expected of you when you walk into the hall. Examination hall, I mean. So that is what I'm trying to tell you here, that the reading comprehension is not a speed reading or a memory test. So you're not expected to learn anything or memorize anything when you walk in for the test. All you're expected to do is use your reasoning abilities and your comprehension abilities to deduce things from the material that is presented to you. Obviously, you're presented with a lot of reading material. How well you read through it and how easily you comprehend from that material is what the GRE is testing. Alright? So now, let me tell you about the RC question format. Right. So when you look at your screen, when you're solving the test, this is how a typical reading comprehension question will look like. You will have your passage on the left hand side and you'll have the question along with the answer choices on the right hand side. Right? Now, as you can see with the passage text here, there's a scroll bar. Well, that only happens when the passage is really long and won't fit on the screen at once. So that is where you are provided with a scroll bar so you can scroll through the passage text. Now, remember what I said about seeing one question at a time? Well, what happens is when the passage is there on the left hand side, it does not move. If there are, say, 3 questions associated with this passage, then the questions will change. So this area right here, this one, this place remains unchanged, and after you solve this question and hit submit at the bottom, which will be somewhere here, once you hit submit, then the next question appears in its place, followed by the next question, and when all 3 questions associated with this passage are done, that's when a new passage appears here. Right? Simple enough? Alright, now let's head into the bigger part of this video. So I'm just going to tell you how this video is spread out. First of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the passage patterns on the GRE. Then I'm going to tell you about the question formats, which is essentially how you respond to the passages and how you answer the questions related to them. All the questions that are given to you are not the same, and that is what we will cover when we do the question formats. And the last thing we cover is question types. Now obviously everybody is aware of this, that reading comprehension likes to test you on a variety of question types. What those question types are is what we will get into in the later part of this video. Alright, now before we get into all of this, let me first tell you a little bit about the components of any passage. Well, when an author writes down a passage, clearly he has a point in his mind. When you start writing anything at all, you have a point that you wish to make. Some people take a while to get to their point. Some people make their point right at the very beginning. However you choose to write, without the point, your passage is purposeless. That is, it has no meaning and it has no direction. So the point, which is your first component, is related to the purpose of the passage. Now obviously this is the most important component of the passage, which is why I have put it at the very beginning. Alright. Background is information required to understand the point. Now the second component is essentially something that gives the passage its rich context. Now when you read something, it is not very easy for you to arrive at the point, especially if there is some historical background to it, or if there is a rich background story that makes the characters come alive. That is where the background is essential. It is not necessary, but it is essential in certain cases where the point that is being made requires some backstory or context. Right? Support, which is the third component, comprises of evidence, assertions, and opinions that are made for the point. So, well, usually this is stuff that is made in support of the point. In the sense, it can never go against the point. It is what is upholding the point. Now, this may be intertwined with the background sometimes, which will mostly be the case of your short passages. Because in the short passages, there will not be too much room for background. So, you might just see that the background and the support are kind of interlinked or intertwined. Alright? The fourth component is implications. Now, implications are things that result from the point. Now, you can call them conclusions or extrapolations from what the author has said or has tried to prove in his or her passage. So, the implication is something that results from the point and, well, may not always be present in the passage. Alright? Okay. So, now that we've understood the components, let's now understand the passage patterns, which, if you remember, is the first thing that we will be discussing today. Alright. Now, I already mentioned in an earlier slide that there are three types of passages. There are the short passages, the long passages, and the argument structure passages. Now, you must understand, you might probably understand what short and long passages are, but then argument structure passages are perhaps a new concept to you. Well, argument structure passages are the type of passages that you see often in a critical reasoning sort of a test. Tests like the GMAT tests you on the argument structure passages. A test like the LSAT also tests you on argument structure passages. Now, argument structure passages are always short passages that have always one question associated with it. Now, these are the passages that ask you to use your critical reasoning abilities. The questions are very typical, and what they are like is something we will explore a little bit later. Alright? Short and long passages are pretty simple to understand, in the sense a short passage is short and a long one is long. If you remember from my very first slide, short passages have up to 250 words, whereas a long passage might have up to 350 words. Alright? As a point of difference, you must understand that short and long passages are quite similar in both their overall content and their associated question types, whereas the argument structure passages are significantly different in that each passage is accompanied by only a single question, and the question types, or rather the question stems associated with these passages, are very different. So let me show you what a short passage looks like As you can see, this is a very short passage because there are only about 8 to 9 lines associated with it. If you look at it, it's quite short in the sense it makes its point also fairly quickly and does not build up on the background too much. Alright, now you will understand the contrast of a short passage with a long passage the moment you see a long passage, which is right about this. If you look at this, you clearly understand this is a very long passage. And when you see a passage like this, you know that up to 7 or up to 10 questions even can be expected to follow it. Alright? Now, an argument structure passage is very different in the sense there is very little content at the top of it, and all the work is around how the question stem has been written. Now, you see that the argument structure passage is only 4 lines, and your job here rather is more outside the passage. You are trying to tell the examiner which of the following will help explain the paradox in the statement. Now, obviously, you are not really comprehending, or rather not really lifting from what has been given to you in the passage. You are applying your own reasoning abilities and reaching an answer that is outside the vicinity of the passage, or outside the vicinity of what has been mentioned in the passage, right? That is why I said that in an argument structure passage, your critical reasoning ability comes into play. Right. Now let's go into the question formats. So for starters, let me tell you about the multiple choice question format, which is of course the most common question format. This is where you are asked to select only one answer choice. Now you see the passage, you read it, and then you're given a question to answer. And when you're given the question to answer, you know that only one of all your options is the right answer. You select that and you submit, and that's about it. Simple, right? Well, things become a little bit more complicated in our next question format, which is called multiple choice, select all that apply. Now this can be a little harder to do because you are given more than one option and all the options given can be correct. It doesn't have to be just the one. Any of them can be correct, which is what makes it more complicated because you are not able to eliminate answer choices here so easily, because you are aware of the fact that all 3 of the given choices can be your answer. So this becomes a little bit trickier, but this is exactly what the question looks like. You're given the passage and then you're asked a question followed by answer choices, which are typically of the with the square symbol next to it, as opposed to, as I don't know if you noticed in the previous one. Okay, sorry, they're not given here, but in the multiple choice format you're given circles because you have to select one. But in the select all that apply variety, you're given check boxes, so you have to select more than one. And in the last question format is select in passage. This is also a fairly simple format wherein you're just given the passage and then asked to select a sentence in the paragraph that seemingly reflects so and so. So it just asks you to select a portion of the paragraph. Now this isn't obviously something that I can demonstrate to you in a video because we're not in the test right now, but trust me, when you enter the test and once you do a practice test, you will understand better how this works. You just simply have to select a chunk of the passage. It could be from here to here, from here to here, whatever it is. You just need to select it and then hit submit, and that's how you submit your answer. Simple, right? Now let's move into the next part of this video, which is the question types. Right. So first of all, I'm going to tell you about the question types associated with the short and long passages. Remember how I said that the question types are the same for the short and the long passages, but different for the argument structure passages? Well, first of all, I'm going to get you acquainted with the question types associated with the short and long passages. Right. So the first question type is the main idea. Now, for those of you who are not aware of this, the main idea question is perhaps the most important question type in reading comprehension. Questions that give you the stem. Which of the following best states the author's main point? Is a main idea question. Right? Now, I'm going to show you the question stems in detail in the next slide, of course. But before that, let me just give you a short overview of each question type. So the main idea is the main point that the author is trying to make. Structure-based question types comprise of purpose questions. So ideally, where you have questions asking you what the author's purpose was in writing the passage in a specific way are structure-based questions. The next type is supporting details questions. These are questions that ask you for details that are supporting the passage. So things like, why was so and so mentioned in the passage? Or, according to the passage, why was this mentioned? The next question type is inference, which includes inference about facts and inference about opinions. So when you infer about facts, you make an inference about a fact, that is something that is a given truth in your passage. And an infer about opinions, you make an inference about an opinion of the author. Meaning or vocab and context questions are questions where you are asked the meaning of a specific word or a phrase in the context of the passage. And last of all, critical reasoning questions are when you are asked to extrapolate the content of the passage. So when you are asked to make a parallel proposition that would be similar to something given in the passage, you are being asked a critical reasoning question. Right, now let me show you the question stems one by one. Like I've already showed to you, that is a main idea question stem where you are being asked for the author's main point. Something like this is a structure-based question where you're asked what the purpose of a particular part of the passage is playing. So the third paragraph of the passage is a clear structural indication, right? So this is a structure-based question. According to the passage, why has so and so been done? That is a detail-based question. So this is a supporting details question where you are asked why a specific detail has been given in the passage and what the purpose of that is, how it supports the main point. Inference-based question is something very similar to what I already said. It is an inference. So another detail will be presented to you, and based on that detail, you have to make an inference, which is all obviously given in your answer choices. A vocab-based question has a question stem of this sort, where you're asked what a particular word might mean in context. And lastly, the critical reasoning question type is where you're asked what would be the best sentence to add on to the end of the passage. This is something that is adding on to the passage, right? It is an extrapolation. So this is a critical reasoning question. Alright, now I'm going to tell you about the argument structure question types. Now to tell you about the argument structure question types, it is important that you understand that any argument structure question has 4 basic building blocks. So essentially every argument has 4 basic building blocks. The first one, let me write it down here just a second. Right. The first one is your premise. Alright. The second one is your conclusion. Pardon the handwriting, please. Right. The next one is your background. And the last one is the counter premise. Now, of these 4 building blocks, the premise and the conclusion are the most important. As their name suggests, the conclusion is what is telling you about the primary point of the author, and the premise is what is supporting that point. So the premise and the conclusion work in unison to give you the argument, right? Now in the first question type, the bold-faced question type, a part of the question is bold-faced. Now you will see examples of these question types later when we go into our live classes and talk to you about each question type in detail, but I'm just giving you an overview. In a bold-faced question variety, you will be given an argument text of which a certain part will be bold-faced, and then in your question stem, you will be asked what role that bold-face plays. So essentially you will be asked, why has that part been bold-faced, right? In the assumption question type, you work with something called an assumption. Now, I've already mentioned these 4 building blocks to you. There's also something called the assumption, which essentially comes into play only in the assumption based question type and in no other question type. Alright, assumption is essentially something that the author thought to be completely true when he was making his argument. So before he makes his conclusion and even supports it with a premise, he has thought of something in his mind which has to be true for the conclusion to be true. Now that is your assumption. In assumption based questions, you will be asked to find that assumption. How you will do that is something you will learn in our later videos. Strengthen or weaken the argument is another question type that also deals a little bit with the assumption. Basically, this is a type of question that asks you to find a new piece of information that will either strengthen or weaken the argument. Now, these are 2 separate varieties, but the reason I've put them together is because you need to understand them together. When the new piece of information that is introduced, which is usually in the form of a multiple choice option, when the new piece of information is introduced into the context of the argument is strengthened. That is when it is a strengthen the argument question. When the new piece of evidence or information that is included weakens the argument, that is when it is a weaken the argument. Alright? Evaluate the argument is again similar to the third variety here. This is where the argument can be both strengthened as well as weakened by the new information that is introduced. Alright, I promise you will understand this better when you start attending our live classes. The paradox is a question type, which is something that I showed you in a previous slide. This is a case where something has been introduced in the argument text that is a clear discrepancy, something that shows a mismatch between point A and point B. So if there's a mismatch between these 2 points, you are asked to explain that mismatch in this question type. The last question type is a very simple one, which is the fill in the blank variety. In this variety, you are given an argument text with simple fill in the blank, that is some text missing, and that is where you are asked to fill it in. Again, you are given answer choices and you have to fill it in. Right, so that was it for this video. We do have another video lined up for you to watch, which is about the general strategies that you can use to approach the reading comprehension questions. You will find the link to it in the description. Please ensure that you watch these videos before you attend our live classes on QSLeap, because they will help you better understand and follow the classes and hopefully ensure that you don't miss out on anything. That's all for now. You will hear me again in the next video. Thank you.